This video shows the removal and installation of the GEnx main fuel pump. It also illustrates the proper installation of the preformed packing seal and packing retainers onto the main fuel pump unit fuel tubes. Always be sure to use the latest version of this aircraft maintenance manual task when performing this task. This digital training aid gives the technician visual help in performing this task. Warning: do not get fuel in your mouth or eyes or on your skin. Do not breathe the fumes from the fuel. Keep the fuel away from sparks, flame, and heat. Fuel is poisonous and flammable, which can cause injuries to persons or damage to equipment. Main fuel pump removal. Do these steps to drain the fuel from the fuel filter bowl. Put a 5 US gallon or 19 liters fuel-resistant container below the fuel filter bowl. Remove the drain plug from the fuel filter bowl and let the fuel drain into the container. Remove and discard the preformed packing from the drain plug. Lubricate the new preformed packing with oil. Install the new preformed packing on the drain plug. Install and tighten the drain plug in the fuel filter bowl. Do the following steps to drain the fuel from the main fuel pump or MFP. Put a fuel-resistant container below the MFP. Remove the 3 drain plugs from the MFP and let the fuel drain into the container. If you are installing a new MFP, reinstall the drain plugs and tighten them with your fingers. Note: the new MFP will come with drain plugs installed. If you are going to reinstall the MFP that you are removing, do these steps. Remove and discard the preformed packings from the drain plugs. Lubricate the new preformed packings with clean engine oil. Put the new preformed packings on the drain plugs. Install and tighten and torque the drain plugs in the MFP. If a new MFP will be installed, remove the fuel pump differential pressure sensor from the MFP as follows. Disconnect the electrical connector from the fuel pump DP sensor. Remove the 2 bolts that attach the fuel pump DP sensor to the main fuel pump. Remove the fuel pump DP sensor. Remove and discard the preformed packings and backup rings from the fuel pump DP sensor. Disconnect the main fuel supply tube from the MFP. Remove the gasket from the inlet port of the MFP and inspect the gasket for damage. Note: you can reuse the gasket if it is not damaged. If it is damaged, discard it and replace with a new gasket. Install a protective cover on the main fuel supply tube hose and the inlet port of the MFP. Loosen a nut that is installed on the stud near the top of the MFP, but do not remove it from the stud. Note: you leave the nut installed on the stud to make sure that the main fuel pump stays on the studs when you install the removal tooling. Loosen and remove the remaining 6 nuts. Attach the line replaceable units, LRU, cradle and jack stand, to the MFP as follows. Align the main fuel pump cradle with the fixture mounts on the MFP. Install the 3 screws that attach the MFP to the fuel pump cradle. Move the LRU jack stand into position below the MFP. Raise the LRU jack stand to the cradle. Install the threaded knob that locks the cradle to the stand. Apply a small amount of up pressure on the LRU fixture, cradle, and FMU. Warning: be careful when you move the component. The component is heavy. Injuries to persons can occur. Note, the MFP weighs approximately 50 pounds or 22.7 kilograms. Remove the last nut. If it is necessary, you can use the applicable jack screws from the jack screw set to separate the MFP from the fuel adapter. This is the task. Install the applicable jack screws from the jack screw kit to separate the MFP from the fuel adapter. Note, there are 2 holes for the installation of jack screws on the MFP mounting flange. There are also guide pins to help keep the MFP in the correct alignment during removal and installation. Using the jack screws, carefully move the MFP away from the fuel adapter with the line replaceable units fixture. Note, make sure you keep a parallel gap between the MFP and the fuel adapter as you push it away from the fuel adapter. Carefully move the MFP aft and away from the fuel adapter with the hydraulic jack. Release the hydraulic pressure on the jack stand and lower the MFP. Move the stand and the MFP away from the engine. If you used jack screws to separate the MFP from the fuel adapter, remove the jack screws from the MFP. Remove and discard the preformed packings from the MFP mounting flange and drive shaft. Remove and discard the 3 preformed packings and the 6 packing retainers from the fuel port tubes on the MFP. Install protective covers on the drive shaft and the open fuel ports on the MFP. Install protective covers on the open fuel ports in the fuel adapter gearbox drive. Warning: be careful when you move the component. The component is heavy. Injuries can occur. Note, the MFP weighs approximately 50 pounds or 22.7 kilograms. Remove the MFP from the line replaceable units fixture as follows. Make sure MFP and LRU jack stand is at the lowest position. Remove the threaded knob that locks the cradle to the LRU stand. Remove the MFP and cradle from the LRU stand and place them on a table. Remove the cradle from the MFP. Main fuel pump installation. Connect the MFP to the line replaceable unit jack stand as follows. Warning: be careful when you move the component. The component is heavy. Injuries to persons can occur. Note, the MFP weighs approximately 50 pounds or 22.7 kilograms. Attach the cradle to the main fuel pump with the 3 screws. Put the MFP and cradle in position on the LRU jack stand. Install the threaded knob that locks the cradle to the LRU jack stand. Remove the protective covers from the MFP drive shaft, the fuel ports, the fuel adapter fuel ports, and the gearbox drive. Clean the mating surfaces and ports of the MFP and the fuel adapter with a clean cotton wiper. Do a general visual inspection of the fuel adapter pad and the mounting studs where the MFP attaches to the fuel adapter. Make sure that the mounting surfaces are clean and that there is no damage to the mounting surfaces or the mounting studs. Install the new preformed packings and packing retainers on each of the fuel tubes of the MFP as follows. Note, this preformed packing seal and packing retainer task illustrates the correct technique to install the packing retainers. You must minimize the amount that you deform the preformed packing retainers when you install them on the fuel tubes. If you open or twist the retainers too much, you can damage the retainers. Some fuel system components use a combination of preformed packing retainers and preformed packing seals at high-pressure fuel connections. There are 2 retainers used for each seal at these locations. Use only new preformed packing seals and preformed packing retainers when you install a component. There are 2 preformed packing retainers used for each preformed packing seal. The preformed packing seal is installed between the 2 preformed packing retainers. Lubricate the preformed packing seal and preformed packing retainers with clean engine oil. The following figures illustrate the correct technique to install the packing retainers. You must minimize the amount that you deform the preformed packing retainers when you install them on the fuel port tubes. If you open or twist the retainers too much, you can damage the retainers. Install the first preformed packing retainer in the groove on the fuel port tube. Install the preformed packing seal. Install the second preformed packing retainer. Inspect the scarf cuts on the preformed packing retainers as follows. Make sure that the scarf cut gap is not excessive. An excessive scarf cut gap is an indication that the preformed packing retainer has been permanently deformed or that the seal and retainer assembly is not correctly installed. If there is an excessive scarf cut gap caused by damage to the preformed packing retainer, replace the preformed packing retainer. Make sure that the scarf cuts on the preformed packing retainers are not aligned. If the scarf cuts are aligned, carefully turn one of the preformed packing retainers so the scarf cuts do not align. Lubricate the new preformed packings with clean oil. Put the new preformed packing on the MFP drive shaft. Put the preformed packing on the MFP mounting flange. Lubricate the threads of the MFP installation studs on the accessory gearbox with clean oil. Position the main fuel pump on the accessory gearbox fuel adapter as follows. Move the MFP below the engine with the LRU jack stand. Raise the MFP into its position aft of the mount pad on the fuel adapter. Move the MFP and stand forward to the fuel adapter mount pad. Adjust the jack stand to align the MFP drive shaft with the fuel adapter mount pad. Move the MFP into the fuel adapter with a positive forward movement until it is fully on the gearbox dowel pins. If it is necessary, do the primary manual core engine motoring procedure to start the MFP drive shaft into the gearbox drive as follows. Remove the nuts and washers that attach the core motoring pad cover to the motoring pad. Remove the core motoring pad cover. Remove and discard the preformed packing. Put a 1/2 inch square drive tool into the accessory gearbox core engine motoring drive. Make sure there is clearance between the gearbox motoring pad studs and the tool handle. Turn the core engine motoring drive to start the MFP drive shaft into the gearbox drive. Remove the drive tool from the core engine motoring drive. Lubricate a new preformed packing with clean oil. Put the new preformed packing on the core motoring pad cover. Put the core motoring pad cover into position on the motoring pad studs. Attach the core motoring pad cover to the accessory gearbox with the washers and the nuts. Tighten and torque the nuts. Install the 7 nuts that attach the MFP to the fuel adapter as follows. Install 3 nuts in easy-to-access locations and tighten the nuts enough to maintain the forward pressure and to keep the preformed packings engaged. Remove the threaded knob and lower the line replaceable unit's jack stand and move it away from the engine. Disconnect the 3 screws and remove the cradle from the MFP. Install the remaining 4 nuts to attach the MFP to the fuel adapter. Tighten each of the 7 nuts 1/2 turn at a time until all nuts have evenly seated the fuel metering unit mounting flange completely against the fuel adapter. Note, the step above will allow the MFP preformed packings to engage the fuel adapter correctly. In a crisscross pattern, tighten the 7 nuts. In a crisscross pattern, tighten the 7 nuts to a final torque. Lubricate the gasket with clean oil. Put the gasket on the MFP fuel inlet port. Connect the main fuel supply tube hose to the MFP as follows. Place the main fuel supply tube into position on the MFP inlet port. Install the 4 bolts that attach the main fuel supply tube and the gasket to the MFP inlet port. Tighten and torque the bolts. If the fuel pump DP sensor is not installed, install the sensor on the MFP. Lubricate the 2 new preformed packings and 2 new backup rings with oil. Install the new preformed packings, new backup rings onto the fuel pump DP sensor using the procedure shown earlier for the MFP tube preformed packing and backup ring installation. Put the fuel filter DP sensor in its position on the fuel filter assembly. Install the 2 bolts that attach the fuel filter DP sensor onto the fuel pump filter assembly. Tighten and torque the bolts. Connect the electrical connector to the fuel filter DP sensor. Put the airplane back to its usual condition and perform any tests of the FMU shown in the power plant test reference table in the airplane maintenance manual.